Wow. Okay, so this time you've given us quite a challenge. We're going to be diving into Islam and Judaism.
Yeah, two major world religions.
Right, and both coming out of the Middle East. And as we unpack these sources, I think you're going to see there are some really interesting shared roots, both geographically
Oh, absolutely.
and in some of their early worldviews. But from that point, they really diverge in fascinating ways. So in this deep dive, we're going to try to go beyond just the facts and give you the key insights into how these religions began, what they believe, and how they are practiced.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start with Islam.
Okay.
Your sources tell us that it's considered the last of the major universal religions. It's got a huge global presence with over 900 million followers.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. And the name Islam itself actually carries a lot of meaning, you know?
I didn't know that.
It comes from an Arabic root word that signifies peace, but also submission. So at its heart, it really means submitting to God or Allah.
That's really interesting. Submission. So, like, that's a core concept.
Totally. And you'll see how that plays out in the beliefs and the practices.
Okay.
Now, while Muslims trace their religious heritage all the way back to Adam.
Wow, all the way back.
Yeah, way back. The tradition, as we know it today, really centers on the figure of the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay. Prophet Muhammad.
Now, Muhammad was born in Mecca around 570 A.D., and his lineage is traced back to Ishmael,
Okay.
which makes him a descendant of Abraham.
Also, there's already a connection.
Right, there's that shared Abrahamic root. And for Muslims, this positions Muhammad as fulfilling God's promise to Hagar.
Okay.
Now, at the time of Muhammad's birth, Mecca was like the center of Western Arabia.
So it was already an important place.
Oh, yeah, a huge hub for trade, culture, religion. And while there were some small Christian and Jewish communities, the dominant religious landscape was polytheistic. You know, they had all these different gods.
Right.
And this era is often referred to as Jahiliyyah, which roughly translates to the age of ignorance.
Okay.
But even then, Mecca was a really important site of pilgrimage.
Pilgrimage, even then. Interesting.
Yeah, it's a big deal. So Muhammad's early life experiences seem to have played a big role in shaping him, right? He was involved in the caravan trade.
Okay.
So he was traveling around. He also ended up marrying a successful businesswoman.
So he was well connected.
Totally.
Right.
And he developed a reputation for being really thoughtful, you know, contemplative.
Okay.
Like he would often go off and spend time in solitude and prayer. And it was during one of these periods of contemplation,
Okay.
around 610 AD,
Right.
while he was in a cave on Mount Hara,
A cave. Okay.
that something really extraordinary happened.
This is where it gets good.
It does. This is where the story takes a turn. In that cave, Muhammad is said to have received a vision of the angel Gabriel.
Wow.
And the angel Gabriel was delivering a message directly from Allah.
So a direct revelation.
Direct revelation. And this event was transformative.
Like it changed everything.
Completely changed everything because it marked his call to be a prophet to the Arab people. And he was entrusted with what Muslims believe to be God's final and complete message to humanity.
The Qur'an.
The Qur'an, exactly. Now, the core of Muhammad's initial message was actually pretty straightforward. He focused on the absolute oneness of Allah.
So one God.
One God. That was the big thing. And he emphasized that this was the same God worshipped by earlier prophets,
Like who?
like Adam, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus.
So he was placing himself in that lineage.
Exactly. He saw himself as restoring and finalizing this original monotheistic faith, and he called people to simple worship and obedience to God's will.
Okay. So like all aspects of life should be submitted to God.
Totally. Now, this message, even in its simplicity, wasn't exactly a hit with everyone in Mecca.
Right, because you have all the existing power structures.
Exactly. The religious leaders, the economic elites, they felt really threatened, right? Because Muhammad was condemning their idols. He was challenging the whole foundation of the Kaaba.
The Kaaba.
The Kaaba was that central shrine in Mecca that housed all these different pagan deities.
Oh, I see.
And it was a huge center for pilgrimage. You know, people would come from all over to visit.
So a lot of money involved.
Big money. And Muhammad's message was like a direct attack on all of that. And as the resistance grew, especially after the death of his uncle who had protected him, things became very dangerous for Muhammad.
Yeah, it sounds like he was in a tough spot.
He was. But luckily, his message had started to resonate with people outside of Mecca, and in 622 AD, a delegation came from Yathrib, which is later renamed Medina.
Okay, Medina.
They invited him to come to their city to mediate disputes and to provide religious and political leadership.
So they saw him as a leader.
Totally.
Not just a religious figure.
Right. And this migration, which is called the Hijra, is a huge turning point.
The Hijra. Okay.
It marks not just a change of location, but the establishment of the very first Muslim community, like an organized Islamic state.
So that's a big deal.
A really big deal. Now, for the next 8 years, Muhammad focused on building this new community.
This Ummah.
This Ummah, right. And this period was marked by ideological debates. People figuring out what this new faith meant. But there were also military conflicts,
With the folks back in Mecca.
Exactly, with those who opposed him. But it's really interesting that when opponents surrendered, they were generally welcomed into the community.
Oh, so it wasn't just about conquering.
Right. And even when they encountered existing Christian and Jewish communities, they were often allowed to keep practicing their religion.
As long as they paid a tribute.
Right, as long as they paid a tribute.
Which makes sense, from a practical standpoint.
Totally. But this protection offered to the people of the book, as they were called, it tells us something important about the early Islamic worldview.
What's that?
That there was a recognition of these other monotheistic faiths.
Interesting. Okay, so by 630 A.D., Muhammad's influence had grown tremendously.
Okay.
Mecca was brought under his control, without much bloodshed, apparently.
Yeah, relatively peacefully. And the pilgrimage to the Kaaba was reoriented towards the worship of the one God. And so Islam became like the main force in Arabia. Just 2 years later, in 632 AD, Muhammad died.
Okay.
And his close companion, Abu Bakr, was chosen as the first caliph.
Caliph.
Yeah, which means successor. So he was the one to lead the community. And this marked the beginning of Islam's rapid expansion.
Wow, so it spread really quickly.
It did. Okay, so now it's super important to understand how Muslims view Muhammad. Okay.
Yeah.
While he is deeply revered and considered the greatest of all prophets, he is not seen as divine.
So he's not God.
No, he's a human being. But he holds the unique title of Seal of the Prophets, meaning he is the last in the line of prophets sent by God. And his life is seen as like the ultimate example of how to live according to God's will. It's a model for how to live.
So his actions have this huge significance.
Huge. And your sources emphasize his really unique threefold role as a prophet, a statesman, and a warrior.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Like he was all those things at once.
Exactly. He received revelation, he governed a community, and he defended it. And this integration of religious, political, and even military aspects is central to the traditional Islamic worldview.
Yeah.
Now, there isn't that sharp separation between the sacred and the secular that we might see in some other traditions.
I see. So it's a more holistic view.
Totally. And that brings us to the Qur'an, which is the foundational text of Islam.
Okay, the Qur'an.
And the word Qur'an itself means the recitation.
Recitation, okay.
And for Muslims, it is without a doubt the direct word of God, like literally revealed to Muhammad word for word. And it's in Arabic.
What kind of Arabic is it?
It's this very highly refined and beautiful form of Arabic, often described as rhythmic prose, almost poetic.
I've heard that it's really hard to translate.
It is, and a lot of Arabic-speaking Muslims believe that it loses something in translation, especially when it comes to ritual prayer. There's also this belief that Muhammad himself was illiterate. Yeah. And for Muslims, this underscores the miraculous nature of the Qur'an.
Ooh, I see what you mean.
Because how could an unlettered man produce such a sophisticated and profound text unless it was divinely inspired?
Right.
So while translations are definitely essential for the vast majority of Muslims who don't speak Arabic, there's still a strong emphasis on learning and reciting portions in the original language.
Memorization is a big part of it then.
Huge. And your sources point out that in many parts of the Middle East, complete memorization of the entire Qur'an is a really respected achievement. Like you're seen as a scholar,
The whole thing.
The whole thing. And even memorizing significant portions is like a basic requirement for serious religious study. Now, the revelation of the Qur'an didn't happen all at once.
No.
It happened over a period of about 22 years. From around 610 until Muhammad's death in 632. And it was later compiled into a standardized official text known as the Uthmanic Recension, around 657. This was to ensure there was like a unified and authoritative version.
Makes sense. So what about the actual contents of the Qur'an?
Okay, so the first chapter of the Qur'an is called the Fatiha.
Fatiha.
And it holds immense significance. It's recited in every single obligatory prayer.
Really? Every prayer.
Everyone. And it's the first thing that Muslims are typically taught to memorize in Arabic. It's considered a concise summary of the entire Qur'an, like it encapsulates the core themes of Islam.
So like humanity's relationship with God.
Exactly. Now, beyond that, the content of the Qur'an is super diverse. It covers a lot of ground. You've got descriptions of the end times, the day of judgment, paradise and hell.
The heavy stuff.
The heavy stuff. But then you also have detailed laws and regulations that cover all sorts of aspects of life, from family matters to commerce.
Oh, so it's practical too.
Super practical. And then there are stories about prophets and historical figures, many of which you'll also find in the Bible. It's interesting, though, the narrative of Jesus, or Isa, in Islam, while holding him in high regard as a prophet, does differ in some key aspects from the New Testament accounts.
How so?
Well, for example, Islam rejects the idea of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus.
That's a big difference.
It is a big difference. And this might reflect the influence of some early Christian theological viewpoints.
Like maybe some Gnostic ideas?
Potentially, yeah. But ultimately, for Muslims, the Qur'an is understood as the perfect, eternal, and uncorrupted word of God.
So it's the final authority.
Absolutely. And your source makes a really interesting analogy, suggesting that the Qur'an occupies a space in Islam somewhat similar to Jesus in Christianity.
Oh, how so?
Well, in that it's seen as the divine directly entering human history, and then Muhammad's role is kind of analogous to that of the Bible. He's like the inspired messenger and witness to that divine revelation.
That's a really insightful comparison.
Okay, so beyond the Qur'an, Islam also recognizes other sacred texts, although they're considered secondary in authority.
Okay.
The Hadith, which are the collected traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, they're super important.
The Hadith.
Okay. They basically document his sayings, his actions, his approvals, and they provide a practical model for how to live as a Muslim.
So they're like a guide to everyday life.
Totally. Especially in areas that maybe aren't explicitly detailed in the Qur'an.
I see.
So you can think of them as supplementing and elaborating on the foundational principles that you find in the Qur'an. And the scope of the Hadith is huge. It covers like everything from how to use a toothpick to like condemning frivolous divorce.
Wow, so like the whole spectrum.
The whole spectrum of life. No, it's important to remember that the Qur'an itself acknowledges and respects Jews and Christians. They're called people of the book. People of the book. Yeah, and it recognizes that they received divine scriptures.
So there's this recognition of a shared heritage.
Absolutely, and your source even quotes Qur'an 2:58, which speaks to their protected status within an Islamic state and their right to practice their faith without being forced to convert.
Oh, it's really significant.
Historically.
Hugely significant. Okay, let's dive into the core beliefs, the doctrinal foundations of Islam.
Okay.
The absolute oneness of Allah, or Tawhid, is like the bedrock of Islamic faith.
One God.
One God.
Yeah.
Your source quotes Qur'an 2:56, which states very clearly, there is no God but He. And it's really important to get this, that the term Allah was not a new concept introduced by Islam.
Oh, really?
It was already known in Arabia before Muhammad, and it's even used by Arabic-speaking Christians today as their word for God.
Oh, wow.
So the Islamic understanding is that Allah is the same God worshipped by Abraham, by Moses, by Jesus, the one and only God.
So it's really emphasizing that continuity.
Totally. And the term Allah itself literally means the God. It's like emphasizing the definite article.
Interesting.
And Muslims believe that Allah possesses a unique set of attributes.
Okay, like infinite mercy, perfect justice, absolute transcendence, meaning He is beyond human comprehension.
Right.
Limitless power and knowledge and complete sovereignty over all creation.
So those are like the big ones.
The big attributes. Okay, now angels also play a really vital role in the Islamic understanding.
Angels.
So there are archangels like Gabriel.
Gabriel, right.
And countless other angelic beings who are believed to help believers to record their actions for the day of judgment. And they're seen as purely spiritual beings, no physical form, no free will.
So they just do God's bidding.
Totally. And it's really interesting because your source points out that in Islamic thought, humans actually have a higher status than angels.
Higher than angels.
Because we have the capacity to choose to know and worship God.
Oh, I see, because of our free will.
Exactly. And the story of God creating Adam and commanding the angels to prostrate before him is a key example of this.
Okay, so that's angels. What about other kinds of beings?
Well, then we've got the jinn, which are these super interesting beings that exist in a realm between the purely spiritual and the physical.
Jinn.
Jinn? Yeah. And unlike angels, they do have free will, intellect, and power.
Oh, so they're more like us in a way?
In a way, yeah. And they can take on various forms.
Oh, forms.
Yeah, so they can appear in different ways. Some jinn are believed to be righteous, capable of salvation, but others, like Iblis, who is basically the equivalent of Satan,
Okay.
they are malevolent and they try to lead humanity astray.
Tricksters.
Totally. And belief in jinn often plays a big role in folk Islamic traditions and stories.
Oh, that makes sense.
Okay, so as a revealed religion, the Word of God is super central to Islam.
Okay.
And the Qur'an itself actually mentions 4 divinely revealed books.
Okay.
The Torah, the Psalms, the Gospels.
Oh, wow. So it acknowledges those.
It does, and the Qur'an. And of course, the Qur'an holds the highest position
Yeah.
as the final, complete, uncorrupted revelation. And prophets are also key figures. And Islamic tradition distinguishes between Rasul, who are like messengers who bring a new divine law or revelation, and Nabi, who are prophets that operate within existing religious frameworks, like they might deliver warnings or good tidings.
Okay. Yeah.
And your sources say that God has sent a prophet to every people throughout history. And some traditions even say there are like 24,000 prophets.
Wow, 24,000. That's a lot.
It's a lot. But Jesus is highly revered as a major prophet, but Muhammad is considered the seal of the prophets.
Oh, the last one.
The last one. Okay, now the concept of the final judgment is like a core Islamic belief.
Okay, the final judgment.
And Muslims believe that at the end of time, God is going to judge all of creation, revealing every single deed, good or bad.
Yeah.
And the afterlife is seen as absolutely real.
So not just symbolic.
Not at all. Eternal bliss of paradise for the righteous and the torment of hell for the wicked.
It's a powerful motivator.
Super powerful. And it often leads to a strong awareness of mortality and the importance of your relationship with God.
Okay, so from these core beliefs, let's talk about the required acts of worship. Like, what do Muslims actually do?
Right. So we've got the 5 pillars of Islam.
5 pillars.
5 pillars, yep. And these are the core practices that unite Muslims worldwide. And they form like the framework of a devout Muslim life.
Okay, so what's the first pillar?
The first pillar is the Shahada, which is the testimony of faith.
Testimony of faith.
There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of God.
I've heard that before.
You probably have. It's probably the most frequently recited statement in human history.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah, and when sincerely believed and uttered, it's like the very foundation of being a Muslim.
Okay, what's the second pillar? The second pillar is Salah, which refers to the 5 daily ritual prayers.
5 daily prayers.
5 times a day. So these are structured acts of worship. They involve specific physical postures, gestures, and recitations from the Qur'an. And these prayers are performed in a state of ritual purity, facing the Kaaba in Mecca. On Fridays, the midday prayer is typically performed in congregation at a mosque, but the participation of women in the main prayer hall, that can vary depending on local customs.
Interesting.
Yeah, and all this physical devotion, it can actually leave a visible mark on the forehead.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you can see it.
Yeah.
Okay, third pillar, Zakah.
Zakah.
Which is often translated as almsgiving or charitable giving.
Oh, giving to those in need.
Right, and it involves giving a specific portion of your wealth for the benefit of the community,
Okay.
to aid the poor, travelers, people in need, to support Islamic causes. And this can be done directly or through organized systems, and it emphasizes that sense of social responsibility that's central to Islamic ethics.
So it's not just about individual piety.
Right, it's about the community.
Okay, what's the fourth pillar?
Fourth pillar is Psalm, which is the obligatory fasting that takes place during the month of Ramadan. So during daylight hours, all physically and mentally able Muslims abstain from food, drink, and intimacy.
Wow, it's pretty intense.
It's a big commitment. And it's considered a time of spiritual reflection, self-discipline, and increased empathy for those less fortunate. And it culminates in this huge celebration called Eid al-Fitr, which marks the end of the fasting period.
So like a big feast.
A huge feast. And this practice is very widely observed throughout the Middle East. You'll see it everywhere.
Okay, so that's 4. What's the last pillar?
Okay, the last one, the 5th pillar, is the Hajj,
Hajj.
the pilgrimage to the Kaaba in Mecca.
Oh, right.
And this is a religious duty that has to be performed at least once in their lifetime by all Muslims who are financially and physically able to do it.
It's a big journey.
It's a massive undertaking. The Hajj involves all these different rituals, often requires guidance, and while the Kaaba itself actually has pre-Islamic roots, Muslims believe that Muhammad rededicated it to the worship of the one God. And the Hajj is just this incredibly powerful, unifying experience. It brings together millions of Muslims from all over the world. And the logistics of it are insane. It's like a massive operation managed by the Saudi government.
Wow, so it's like a huge event.
It is massive.
Okay.
Your source also mentions the concept of jihad, which is often misunderstood in the West.
Jihad.
Yeah. While it can refer to like an external struggle or even warfare, its primary meaning is the internal struggle for moral and spiritual perfection.
Oh, okay, so it's about self-improvement.
Totally. It's called the greater jihad. So the lesser jihad is like outward struggles, but for most Muslims, the focus is on this continuous effort to live according to God's will. And then there's Islamic law, known as Sharia. And its importance is really rooted in the Islamic understanding of human nature, which is that humans are prone to straying from the right path. We need guidance.
Okay.
And Sharia tries to categorize all human actions from obligatory and recommended to permissible, discouraged, and forbidden. So it's like a whole spectrum.
Oh, I see. So it's trying to provide a framework for how to live.
Exactly. And in theory, it's intended to provide guidance for every aspect of life. There's no area that's untouched by religious principles, but the practical application of Sharia has varied a lot throughout history and even in the modern world.
Right, because the world is a lot more complex now than it was back then.
Totally. And in many Muslim-majority countries, civil law systems, often influenced by Western legal traditions, coexist or even dominate over traditional Sharia. Partly due to the complexities of modern life. And then we see places like Saudi Arabia, where Sharia has a central role in the government. It's used to determine punishments and stuff. Whereas in other countries, it might be mostly confined to, like, family matters,
Right.
Marriage and divorce.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Definitely not. And the modern phenomenon of Islamic fundamentalist movement often calls for a greater implementation of Sharia. They see it as a return to an authentic way of life. But this push often faces resistance from political leaders. And your sources suggest that full-scale adoption of Sharia in the modern world, it's just really tricky.
Yeah, it makes sense given the different interpretations and how the world has changed.
Right. Okay, so the Islamic world, while sharing these core beliefs and practices, also has significant internal diversity.
Okay.
There are two main branches.
Two main branches.
Sunni Islam.
And Shiite Islam.
And Sunnis make up the vast majority. Roughly 90% of Muslims globally, and in the Middle East. But that percentage is higher if you include Iran, which is predominantly Shiite.
Okay, so Iran's a big factor.
Big factor. And this initial split happened after the death of Muhammad.
Oh, so like a succession crisis.
Yeah, basically. It was over who should lead the community, who should be the caliph.
Makes sense. Power vacuums can lead to that kind of battle.
Totally. And your source draws a parallel to the historical split between the Orthodox and Roman Catholic Christians.
Oh, interesting.
Where despite their differences, they share a lot of core beliefs and practices. So Sunni Islam, whose adherents often call themselves people of the Sunnah and the consensus, emphasizes the Sunnah, which means the practices and traditions of Muhammad.
Okay, so they follow his example.
Exactly. And they recognize the first four caliphs who came after Muhammad as legitimate leaders, but not prophets, right? And they emphasize the authority of the ummah, the community as a whole. They reject the idea of any kind of special religious or political authority for the descendants of Muhammad or his cousin Ali.
Okay.
Now, in Sunni Islam, the ulama, which is like the body of religious scholars, they serve as the custodians and interpreters of the Qur'an, the Sunnah, and Sharia. They're the teachers, prayer leaders, legal experts.
So like a kind of priesthood.
Kind of. But their authority comes from their knowledge and the consensus of the community, not from some kind of hierarchy or lineage.
Oh, so it's more decentralized.
Exactly. And in smaller communities, lay Muslims often take on many of these roles.
Okay, what about Shiite Islam?
Shia Islam makes up about 10% of the global Muslim population, and it actually has several sub-branches.
Okay.
The Zaydis, the Ismailis, and the largest group, the Twelver Shiites.
Twelver Shiites.
And they are the dominant group in Iran and have large populations in Iraq, Lebanon, Pakistan, Syria.
So they're pretty spread out.
They are. And the term Shiite comes from Shiat Ali, which means the party or the followers of Ali.
Ali.
Yeah, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. And their origin lies in the belief that Ali was the rightful successor to Muhammad.
Okay.
And the death of Ali's son, Hussein, at the Battle of Karbala in 680 AD. This is a pivotal event, particularly for Twelver Shiites, and it really shaped their identity.
Okay, so there's a strong historical element to their beliefs.
Absolutely. And Shiites believe that Muhammad and Ali had this unique spiritual status and that the right to lead the Muslim community was divinely bestowed upon Ali and then passed down through a line of imams.
Imams.
Yeah, and these imams are considered infallible spiritual and political leaders. They're believed to have special knowledge, powers, and a divine favor.
So they're kind of like intermediaries between God and humanity.
Totally. And this is a concept that Sunnis often reject.
I see.
They see it as too close to, like, the Christian idea of Jesus or Persian ideas of priest kings. Now, a key belief for Twelver Shiites is the disappearance of the 12th imam, Muhammad al-Mahdi, in 873 AD. And they believe he's still alive, like in hiding.
In hiding.
Yeah, and that he will return as the Mahdi, who is this divinely guided figure who will bring justice and peace to the world before the final judgment. And in between his disappearance and this expected return, there was a period of his representatives, or wakils. But this lack of a clear, divinely appointed leader has had a big impact on Shiite religious authority. Now, aside from this belief in the imamate, much of Twelver Shiite theology and ritual is actually quite similar to Sunni Islam.
So differences aren't that big.
Not in every aspect, no. Although they do have their own distinct shrines, some minor variations in rituals, and generally a more emotionally expressive kind of piety.
Okay.
Now, the biggest difference when it comes to religious leadership is this enhanced authority given to Shiite mujtahids.
Mujtahids.
Yeah, they were the highest-ranking religious scholars, and they have the authority to interpret Islamic law independently. And this system kind of culminated in the Iranian Revolution, where the Ayatollahs, who are these high-ranking mujtahids, they seized political power.
So they have a lot of influence.
Huge influence.
Yeah.
Now, Sunni-Shiite relations have often been tense, especially recently with all the geopolitical stuff going on and Iran's efforts to, spread its revolutionary ideology.
Yeah, it's a complex situation.
Super complex. Okay, we also have to mention Sufism.
Sufism.
Which is not a separate division like Sunni and Shiite, but more of a broad spiritual movement.
Oh, okay.
That emphasizes the mystical dimension of Islam.
Mystical dimension.
Yeah, it's about achieving a direct personal experience of the divine through practices like meditation, music, poetry.
Oh, interesting. So it's more about inner experience.
Exactly. And they've been organized into various orders or brotherhoods since around the 12th century. And historically, they've played a significant role as a missionary force and also as a voice for the oppressed, the marginalized.
That's cool.
And while they sometimes have tension with more orthodox religious authorities, their influence remains really vital in Muslim religious life.
So it's a significant strand within Islam.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how Islam is lived and practiced in the Middle East today.
Okay.
And it's really crucial to remember that the Middle East is not a single entity, despite the influence of Arabic in much of the region, with the exception of Iran, of course.
Right.
And the role of Islam in politics varies widely. So in some countries, like Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, Islamic principles are seen as essential to the government's legitimacy. They're like intertwined. But in other contexts, Islam has been a force of opposition. Expert speaker.